Thank you, Barkley. Good evening, guys. Steve Lee, alcoholic. Man, it's a treat to be here with you guys. I mean, but I got to tell you, as Scott said, it really feels daunting. I was kidding with Olaf earlier. You know, I was in Toronto about last month about this time and spoke at a conference there, and somebody asked me if I was nervous, and I said, no, there's only about 2,500 people there, and I said, no, I'm really not. I said, because I'm getting on a plane and leaving the country in the morning, right? But I can't run away from this talk, I can't run away from being with you guys this weekend, but I know I don't have to. See, I know it's a safe place to be for me. And I hope that while I've only got one story to tell, different parts of that story seem to be emphasized at different times and with different people. And even as Scott was saying that earlier, that he hoped that his story hadn't changed, and I know exactly what he meant. I certainly don't want that sobriety date to change, but I discover over time that actually what it used to be like in my story has changed dramatically, right? I see it differently, and I experience it differently, and hopefully more accurately and more clearly. So it is ever evolving for me. I have been, it's been very reflective time for me to get ready to come out here and be with you guys. And I've come to this conference. I asked Tim to put one of these old pictures up. This picture is, I think, Scott, correct me, but I think it's probably 1999, maybe 2000. That's before the usual suspects moved out to this location. We were then 15 guys meeting. It evolved from that camp out and a couple of other iterations to when I rolled in, was out at a retreat house up in Center Hill Lake called the Wind in the Trees. And for those of you who can't spot it yet, that's me in those light blue jeans and black shirt and beard in the front row. And those men and that weekend were seminal in part of my recovery. I had moved back to Nashville after I was probably 10 years sober going on that retreat. We'd moved back here to Nashville at 8 years sober when I was in 1997, and I got an invitation to go. And I didn't know much about what that was going to be, like some of you who might be here for the first time didn't know what this was going to be. And but I did decide I wanted to spend time with those men. I wanted to get to know those men and be a part of what was going on. I'll even tell you further that a day or two before the retreat, we got the schedule of events. And there was a deal Saturday night that made me terribly uncomfortable. And I nearly didn't go. But I thought more. I talked to my buddy Jerry, who also went. Jerry's the cool dude in the back row with the sunglasses there. And we made all the sophomoric jokes. Scott must have been taking the picture. No, Scott is in that picture. He's right in the middle on the back row. Yeah. Time has not been good to Scott and me. Yeah. This spiritual growth will take a toll on a man. But I called Jerry, and we made all the sophomoric jokes guys like me and Jerry would make about what that particular deal was going to be, and we're about to talk ourselves out of not going, and we both said, what the heck, man? He says, I want to be, that won't kill me. I want to be a part of what's going on. I will do something that makes me a little self-conscious, a little uncomfortable, to be with the men that are going to be there and to see where this takes me. I wanted to be a part of what was going on in AA generally and with some of the men that I was meeting and having the chance to be a part of. And that has continued up through tonight. So it was a real treat to be included there. I did do the exercise, by the way. I didn't like it. I was uncomfortable, and I'm here, whatever this is, 30 years later or 20 years later. It's all good. Scott, what a great talk Scott gave, and I... Yeah. Well, look, to be fair, I don't want you to use up all of my time giving Scott applause, but I acknowledged him. That's enough. Now, it was a great talk, and I realized how many things, again, that Scott and I have in common. And while I was not a pilot, I did have a 1967 Chrysler Cruiser station wagon. And while I've not seen the curvature of the earth, I did miss a curve on U.S. Route 31 south of Franklin, which was my last DUI, which got me here. And like Scott, I did not get drunk and pee in the closet, but I nearly peed in the closet last week, and that's what this age will do to you, right? Look, my sobriety date's June 30th, 1989, and my home group is the Recovery on the Road group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Meets here in Nashville, down on historic Music Row, on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And it's been fun to be a part of that group. When I tell you my sobriety date is June the 30th, for me that means that my last time I took a drink or a drug was June the 29th of 1989. And I say that because at about 6 months sober, I went to my sponsor, Frank, and I said, Frank, I'm confused about this sobriety date. Is it the last day I had a drink or the first day I didn't have a drink? And he said, Steve, I'm just impressed with the quality of questions that are keeping you up at night. He said, I don't care. Pick one. He said, because I'm much less concerned with when you had your last drink than you not taking the next one. So I took June the 30th. June the 29th, I was not stopping drinking. June the 30th, I was not stopping drinking. My wife, I was, however, scheduled into a treatment facility on July the 1st of 1989. And again, because of legal entanglements, because of that, I'd been convicted of my 6th DUI a year before. They'd given me some jail time, and they were going to cut some of that jail time off if I went to what they referred to as residential drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And I'd never heard all those words strung together, and I didn't really know what that meant, but it sounded marginally better than jail. So I said, I'll do it, and I had a year of probation to complete this treatment. And so July the 1st, I'm going to go. My wife and I went out with 3 other couples on June the 29th. This wasn't some wild night of debauchery, just dinner, some few drinks at dinner, bottle of wine, came home, and had what to this day is the last time I've had a drink. And I usually lose that connection with you guys when I share this, that identification, one alcoholic with another, that's so critical. Because my last drink was an amaretto on the rocks. And that is just no way to go down as an alcoholic. There's no street cred in AA with amaretto, Those were the dark days. But I wasn't stopping drinking. I just came home after dinner. I had that drink, smoked a joint, went to bed, got up the next day. My wife and I spent that day with our daughter. My buddy Ricky came by on Saturday morning, July the 1st, to drive me off to treatment. My wife, Connie, who many of you know, Connie and I had been married 7 years at the time. We had a 5-year-old daughter. Connie walked out with me to the car. And as I'm getting in Ricky's car and we were saying those heartfelt goodbyes, she said something that a lot of my compadres here in AA, the kind of support they didn't get from their family or their loved ones or their friends. She said, no matter what, baby, don't stop drinking. Yeah, she's a keeper. No matter what, baby, don't stop drinking. See, Connie wasn't trying to get me to stop drinking. Now, there were an awful lot of things Connie was trying to get me to stop doing. And a few things she was trying to get me to start doing. Be a good husband. Be a good father. Come home. Don't go there. Don't go with them. Don't go with her. But not stop drinking. Connie and I as I said, we'd been married 7 years at the time. We had met just over 7 years before. We met when she had moved back to Nashville from where she'd been living in Lake Tahoe. for a few years dealing baccarat. She got married out there and got divorced out there. And after that divorce, she came immediately back to Nashville. And my friend Ricky and I, Ricky's given me a ride to some of the best nights of my life. He took me to treatment. He took me to meet my wife. Before that, Ricky and I are driving out there, unbeknownst to me, that she had been set up on a blind date with Ricky. But we go to a bar, and there's Connie, and, she had a pocket full of divorce money and a divorce pickup truck and a divorce 8-ball of cocaine, and I just fell for that package. And remarkably, she fell for me, Probably not remarkably, right? That's what brought us together. And so Connie wasn't trying to get me to stop. She said that to me that day when I left. We didn't talk again for at least 2 weeks. I was in treatment. They had blackouts were more, I guess, more then than they are now. But we didn't talk for over 2 weeks. That's the thought she left me with. I wasn't going to stop drinking. I was going to do my time. I was going to go do what I had to do. She, of course, had no intention of stopping drinking. While I was in treatment, and I'll talk about it more, and going out to meetings of AA, and in fact going to multiple 12-step programs, right? And having multiple 12-step programs come into us, and I'm grateful for all of them. For two things. Number one, I was grateful to see anybody. Number two, that helped me figure out where I best fit. And I could, because I qualify for almost all of them. It's like Scott was talking about, right? I did, I'm an alcoholic. I got that very special relationship that an alcoholic has. I got that can't stay stopped and can't control how much I take part of alcoholism. So me and alcohol had a committed relationship, but it was not a monogamous relationship. We invited other people to the party. So that was all in play, right? But man, I'm alcoholic. But somehow that light came on for me while I was there, and I recognized that I knew that I needed to not drink, which is different than not wanting to drink, but I know I probably need to not drink. It's hurting the people I love the most. Well, because like I said, Connie wasn't trying to get me to stop drinking, but there's a host of things she wanted me to stop doing or do differently. She, on the other hand, went out with 10 days later with two ladies, and they went to Zany's Comedy Club, of all things. They ordered a round of drinks. They ordered a second round of drinks. When the second round of drinks came and the waiter was putting Connie's drink down, she stopped her, or the waitress, and said, I've had enough. Now, what Connie would tell you is that she didn't have that thought one moment before. She had not been contemplating not drinking. She wasn't conflicted about drinking. She said, I've had enough. And she hadn't had a drink or a drug since. She went 4 years not drinking and not coming to AA. Now she's a very active member of Alcoholics Anonymous after that 4th year. In fact, this weekend she's at a women's retreat that she goes to twice a year. Now, Connie said she would have got to AA a lot sooner if I had not been so helpful to her. So don't overhelp the other. How often, if you've been here a little while, how often you've been in a meeting and see the new guy show up, right? And then he's about 13 days sober, and this is what you hear. I wish my family had a program. Jesus, dude, you still got beer on your breath. Lighten up. We begin to see what other people need so quickly, right? That certainly was true of me. I'd come home and tell her what I said, boy, you should have heard the speaker tonight. I got turned on right away by listening to you guys. I really did. I didn't know what AA was going to look like really for me, but I was just... I was connected, and maybe that's that language of the heart. Maybe it wasn't information, right? Because I'd say, you should have heard the speaker tonight. She'd go, well, what do you say? And I'd go, I don't know. But I feel better for him having said it. I can't tell you now there was tons of information. But what was happening was I was having an experience. I was having that identification, perhaps in ways I didn't even recognize or realize at the time. Go back and talk a little bit about getting up to that treatment experience and getting to AA. I grew up in Smyrna, Tennessee, not far from here. Middle-class family. I'm just the poster boy for middle-class alcoholism. You know, we've got some exciting stories in here, and some people, tell them really well too. And so we're on the edge of our seat listening to this huge crash and burn moment. And men, they are real and they are true and they are useful. And I got a couple that feel like that for me, but the truth is on me and so many of the people I know, this alcoholism is death by 1,000 paper cuts. It is day by day telling a lie here, keeping a secret there, undermining the trust of the people around me, not showing up when I need to be there. The crash and burn moments bookend the story. But those day-to-day moments are what I look back on and realize how that was just sucking the life out of me in ways that I couldn't articulate at the time. You know, Dr. Bob talks about the fact, or it says about Dr. Bob in the big book, that he was painfully aware of feeling somehow abnormal, for he did not yet fully understand what it meant to be alcoholic. And I will tell you that I showed up with you guys, and long before I got here, I was painfully aware of feeling somehow abnormal. But I didn't know that had anything to do with alcoholism. I didn't know that had anything to do with the problems I had drinking. I showed up at AA with alcohol-related problems. That's what I said the first little group I was in when people were going around the room introducing themselves. I'm, Bill, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Ben, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Bob, I'm an alcoholic. I'm Sally, I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I thought, that's impressive. And then it's getting to me, and I don't know what I'm going to say because I'm not ready to be alcoholic. I didn't know what an alcoholic was, as you guys were going to talk about it, but I did know enough to know that if I said out loud I'm alcoholic, somebody's going to suggest I'm not drink anything at all. And that's an overcorrection to my problem. So I said, I'm Steve, I'm a problem drinker. And they said, that's fine. And see, I think it's important for me to remember, now that I've been here a while, to let somebody walk through the door and find their place. Give people some room. We don't show up knowing how to play the game. So I don't care what you say you are when you get here if you want to be here. And then we can go have a cup of coffee and talk about stuff. That's one of the lost arts in AA, the cup of coffee. And I'm one of the guys who's lost it. I'm one of the hustle home after a meeting guys now. A guy asked me to sponsor him a couple of weeks ago. And I said, do you have a car? Yeah. Because if you don't have a car, this is going to be terribly inconvenient for me. What is that? You find yourself caught, because I got 1,000 questions going, and he just asked the one we beg him to ask. Get somebody to sponsor you. And I go, well, how inconvenient is this going to be? What part of town do you live in? Are you familiar with mass transit? I'm joking, but I'm not joking. I got asked that stuff of me. I grew up there in Smyrna, middle-class family, a good kid, went where I said I was going to go. I hung out with who I said I was going to hang out with, and I came home when I said I was going to come home. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid to color outside the lines. I'm a guy that played by the rules and desperately didn't want to play by the rules and loved looking at the guys who weren't playing by the rules. But I played by the rules all the way up through high school. I went where the action was, right? I'm around people doing all the stuff that we were doing. And I didn't find it that hard not to do it. I didn't drink and I didn't drug in high school. but it was all around me. You know, the book says if a mere code of morals or philosophy of living were sufficient, we would have recovered a long time ago. And I will tell you that my code of morals and my philosophy of living were sufficient. Right up until the moment they were no longer sufficient. And that kind of coincided with me taking a drink. Now, I'd had a drink of Daddy's beer, you know, and my mom was, you know, and fixed that martini for him, and have 2 martinis ready when he got home on a Friday night after being out traveling all week, as he did, being a salesman. And he'd give me a sip of that, you know, and laugh when I'm 10, 11, 12. And then when I'm 14, 15, I get the grown-up kind of sip of it, right? But I never drank with purpose. I never longed to drink. But finally, I'm out with a couple of buddies, freshmen in college, and they're passing around a bottle of Boone's Farm wine, and that got back to me, and it was sweet enough for me to drink it. Because I wasn't a guy who I wasn't going to do well at drinking something that didn't taste good to me initially. I needed, you know, Amaretto and Boone's Farm, right? You sort of got me pegged, right? I wouldn't put that Boone's Farm on my pancakes now. They were so sweet. But I knocked it back, and I had a wonderful experience. You know, we all talk about our own experience, but it was, you know, I had a good time. It was freeing, and I blacked out. I'm a blackout drinker. It doesn't require much for me to black out. I don't think it's a requirement to be alcoholic. I don't think not blacking out gives you a pass. I just know I'm a blackout drinker. And I blacked out probably 50% of the time I drank, because it apparently didn't require even that much for me to black out. And I love the comedian Dave Attell said he was a blackout drinker, or he liked to call it time travel. And that's what it felt like to me, right? You ever go, whoa, how did I get here in the future, and what has been going on? And you don't ask people. You read their faces. You go through that day like a forensic detective, you know, looking for clues. And then you got that one buddy, right, that you can call and go, man, you know, what about last night? He goes, oh, Steve, man, even you don't want to know. So how often did I just not go back somewhere or walk away from them or it or this? I started drinking, you know, I don't know if I drank alcoholically from that moment on. I don't know if I was alcoholic before I took the drink or right after it, or at what point I became alcoholic. I don't enter into that debate because I can't tell. Because I don't know if I drank alcoholically from that moment on, because I drank so enthusiastically from that moment on. And it is impossible for me to know whether I could have moderated my drinking because I was not trying. And it is impossible for me to know whether I could have stopped and not started again because I did not try for quite a long time. And early on, I paid a price for drinking. I mean, there were consequences right away, but I was more than willing to pay the price of admission during those times. It's like playing Wheel of Fortune and spinning that wheel. And about 95% of the stuff on my wheel was good, right? I feel good, get the girl, have the party, go to the game, run with my buddies, you name it. Or some version of what A Vision for You says most normal drinkers get. Conviviality, joyous intimacy with friends, colorful imagination, relief from care, from care and boredom, and worry. And a feeling that life is good. And then a couple of places on the wheel was, you're gonna embarrass yourself at a party, or you're gonna forget to pick up your date, or you're gonna forget to bring her home. But that's okay, man. I'm a kid in college. That's what we're doing. I couldn't see it differently than the people around me. My alcoholic life seemed the only normal one. What's amazing is in this progressive illness of alcoholism I have continued to progress. A lot of the people that I was drinking with did not progress at the rate I was. They weren't necessarily alcoholic. They were beginning to show some responsibility in their life, to grow up, to move on, and yet I am still on this downward curve. And somebody's playing with my wheel. And now when I spin the wheel, there's DUI. There's head-on collision going down the interstate. There's being drunk at the hospital when your daughter's born. There's infidelities in your marriage. There's stealing time and money from a family business. There's betraying the trust of those closest to you. And once in a while, I'm having a good time. But the price is getting out of proportion. But I keep trying not to stop drinking. I keep trying to do better, which seems like the right thing to do because I don't understand alcoholism. So I'm going to spend a lot of time not trying to stop drinking, but trying to not let that happen again, whatever that is. I won't do that again. But I didn't seem to be able to do that, and I didn't understand why. You know, there's a line back into the employer. And I often kid, I know I'm in here with a dedicated group of AAs, but you got to be all in to read all the way to the employer. That chapter's not dog-eared, okay? Oh, you're all about page 63, right? Yeah. But that line back in there goes, when dealing with an alcoholic, there may be a natural annoyance that someone could be so weak, stupid, and irresponsible. It says, this is true even when you understand the malady better. So 2 points I want to make on that. Number one, back then I thought I was weak, stupid, and irresponsible. To the untrained eye, alcoholism looks weak, stupid, and irresponsible. It looks like if you cared enough, you wouldn't do that. If you loved me enough, you wouldn't do that. If you didn't want to go to jail, you wouldn't do that. If you cared about your daughter, you wouldn't do that. It looks like good intentions, firm resolve, and an important reason would be sufficient. Because I don't understand the nature of my relationship with alcohol, with that powerlessness, that physical aspect of it, that once I drink it, I'm unpredictable. And it was made all the more baffling by those times that it went seemingly okay. So I keep trying to think I can pull it off. So I'm not trying to stop drinking. I'm trying to figure out how to drink and get everything alcohol does for me without suffering and hurting the people based on what alcohol began to do to me. And I don't know, I can't make that shift until I get to you. And it was huge news when you guys shared with me that description that Scott referenced earlier and that I already talked about, that if, when you honestly want to, you can't stop entirely, or when drinking, you have little control of the amount you take, you're probably alcoholic. When Bill and when Silkworth talked about that phenomenon of craving, how cool is the language that we have to talk about our alcoholism? I mean, you gave me voice to talk about something I couldn't articulate before I got here. Phenomenon of craving. Were you ever out at the bar and after about your second or third drink, nudge the guy next to you, go, I don't know about you, pal, but that phenomenon of craving's kicking in on me. Whoa, lack of power is my dilemma. No, like Scott, I just thought I changed my mind. I didn't understand the nature of what was happening until I got captured and heard you guys talking about it and not telling me what my problem was. It was talking to me about your problem and then ultimately your solution. And I'm still here tonight to hear about the solution and the problem. I still need to hear both. My drinking was a lot like, I want to share 2 or 3 things because I'm going to talk about a lot of things tomorrow and Sunday morning that sometimes I talk about in my talk, but I hope to flesh them out a little bit more. But Connie and I, we were married, we had this daughter, we moved to New Orleans in 1980. And man, that was a tough time for us. I worked in a family business. I worked for my brother and mother. My dad had died at 47 years old. I was 18. That had nothing to do with me drinking, but it had a lot to do with me not having to worry about what my dad thought, not having to be accountable or responsible to that authority figure in my life and that example in my life. However, let me say, I came from a drinking family. My dad was a drinker and, from what I hear, a bit of a womanizer. And but we're done. I'm a salesman who couldn't make sales calls. That's a tough gig. And I'm going out, I'm traveling 4 states. And I'm going to a town and not going in to the place I'm supposed to go. And then I'm going to the next spot and not going in. And then sometimes I literally would wait in the parking lot till the guy I was supposed to see left for lunch and go in and ask for him. And they'd say, he's not here, and I'd leave my business card and say, well, tell him I came by. I got to call my brother, who I worked for, at the end of each day because, obviously this was before cell phones and email and checking in, or certainly Salesforce and CRMs and stuff. So you just make a call report. And I got to call and talk to my brother and either lie about how my day has been, but Becky, a woman named Becky was his assistant. And I'd call and Becky would answer, and I'd say, Becky's Johnny there? And she'd go, yeah, just a second. No, wait, I'll call back later. I'd call 3 times until she said he's not there, and I go, well, tell him I called. And then, or I'd have to lie, then I'd go back to the hotel room, or I should say motel, little motor lodges, if you remember those, and you pull up right in front of your door and go in. And I'd drink and get high all night and gonna do better in the morning, and couldn't do it. One time when I was living in Atlanta, I'd been doing this same thing. I kept moving around. I lived in Fort Lauderdale, in Atlanta, and then back to Nashville, then back to New Orleans before coming back to Nashville. And at Atlanta stop, I was taking a lot of speed along with my drinking during that time. I'd run this thing as far as I could go that I finally found myself lying on the floor in this little apartment I lived in. And I'm not a kill yourself kind of guy. But I thought maybe that's what I needed to do. But I didn't know how. I was just going to kind of lay on the floor in the fetal position and wish it to happen, right? Because I can't do anything. And literally a day and a half passed. There'd been knocks at the door. The phone's ringing. I finally unplugged it. I'm there about, 36, coming up on 48 hours. And I'm laying there and I thought, well, either I got to kill myself or fix a sandwich because I'm hungry. And so I got up, fixed a sandwich. I called home finally. I called my brother. I called my mother, who also worked in that deal. Did the mea culpa and got a fresh start. You guys ever get the fresh start? I mean, you've told it. Okay, I plead guilty, but I'm going to do better. It just rolled because nothing changed in me. We're in this transformational program. Not a pull yourself up by your bootstraps program. I couldn't make it happen, and I didn't know why I couldn't make it happen. It felt weak, stupid, and irresponsible. I got out of that treatment center. Like I said, I totaled 6 cars. When I was still living there in Atlanta, this was just before the I'm going to kill myself weekend, right? I'm at a bar one afternoon drinking kamikaze shooters and taking Tuanols, and I say that just so you don't think Boone's Farm and Amaretta's all I had. And I went east in the westbound lane of I-285 on the perimeter of Atlanta and just disoriented, hit a car head on. It sent people to the hospital. It sent me to the Cobb County Jail. I came to in that jail. I vomited on myself and urinated on myself, or I hope I did, because somebody did. And so that's how I came to in that drunk tank. But in all honesty, that morning, I had never been more afraid of the consequences that awaited me legally, personally, professionally. I'd never been more ashamed of what I'd done and the people I'd harmed. I didn't yet know the extent of the injuries. They turned out not to be fatal or critical, certainly. I'd never been more afraid of what was in front of me legally because of that. And I'd never been more certain that I'll never drink again. And 10 days later, I'm driving down the road, smoking a joint, drinking a bottle of wine, thinking, I nearly overreacted to that. And it didn't feel crazy. See, that's the thing about it. I didn't feel nuts about that. I got that. I was strangely insane, right? What's the back of our shirt say this weekend? Where alcohol was concerned, we had been strangely insane. The description of insanity I'm drawn to in the book is after Jim pours the whiskey in his milk. And that's not what's crazy. That's poor taste, but that's not crazy. What's crazy is just before that it says he knew that a drink meant a trip back to the asylum, the loss of his family, loss of his job. And the book says, whatever the precise definition may be, what can this lack of proportion and the ability to think straight be called but insanity? Whatever the DSM-5 says, right? Whatever the psychiatrists say, whatever the therapists say, whatever that definition is, what can this lack of proportion? And I realize that I have gone through life drunk and sober, responding disproportionately to the event I'm responding to. Sometimes I over-respond, sometimes I under-respond. Sometimes I don't recognize the pain and hurt and discomfort I'm causing my wife and my daughter with a quick, sarcastic quip, only to find out later how much that hurt. Sometimes I over-respond to the smallest slight by one of you. Now, one of you guys could close your eyes like Darren for about 5 minutes during this talk, and I could quietly hate you for a lifetime. And really, it wouldn't be hate, and that's not true. That's a laugh line, right? Here's what would happen. But I could be absolutely insecure, afraid, uncomfortable. Wait, what'd I do wrong? And yet, my whole job is to not let you see me feeling that way. I'll talk about that some more tomorrow. I came out of that treatment center and went immediately, got connected in AA, going to meetings. I'm a meeting goer, but I'm a guy that's going. I sometimes forget to tell this story. I wanted to tell it tonight, even a little out of sequence. But I went to meetings and went home. And I'm loving the meetings. But it was, July is when I came in, right? August is when I started going to meetings. The weekend after Thanksgiving, I'm at a Saturday morning meeting down at 202, back in the sunroom, packed. I get there early for a change. And there's this chatter, the same kind of chatter that's been going on in here between meetings. And it dawns on me, these people are talking to each other between meetings. That was novel to me, that you were actually building relationships. And at the end of the meeting, a guy said, we're all going to Shoney's to have lunch. Who wants to go? Like, everybody's welcome. And I desperately wanted to go. I was 6 months sober now, right? Close to 6. I can't do the public school math. And I get up and I get in my car to go over to that restaurant where they're going to have lunch, and about halfway there, I turn off and go home. I just couldn't go. The next week, I did the same thing. I did it 3 weeks in a row. And the reason I couldn't go is because I was unwilling to have what I deemed might be an uncomfortable, embarrassing moment. That I would be self-conscious. This hyper self-consciousness that I would learn is the root of my trouble. I was afraid that I'd have to walk up to a table and there might already be 6 people sitting at a table for 6. And I wouldn't know whether to ask somebody to scoot over or pull a chair up, or can you make room for me, or do you even remember me? I was in the meeting. And I said, so I'd just go home. And I said, what I needed was a couple of guys to come over to me after the meeting, go, Steve, we've been talking. We all want you to go to lunch with us. And we're just arguing over who gets to sit with you. Well, I would have gone, you would have removed the self-consciousness. I would have gone and I would have dominated the conversation. But I wasn't willing to risk it. I can't tell you how many things self-centered fear has prevented me from risking in my life. I think about the first time that we were at, that we had the usual suspects, called it the usual suspects. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, but not in front of everybody, just one-on-one later. But we had it here. It's the first time we had it on this property, and we met in the room where registration is, and there were 40 of us, and Howard Poland's led the weekend. And for those of you who know Howard, just what a treasure. And that's the first time I heard Howard tell the story of living life like it's on a frozen lake. And he later wrote a book that some of you have with that title, My Life on a Frozen Lake. And the premise, and Howard is living life, and I'm oversimplifying it, but living life as if I'm walking across a frozen lake, and with each step afraid that the ice is going to break and I'm going to fall through and drown. And what a tedious and angst-ridden walk that would be to just, whoa. And I told Howard that I had improved on his story. And if you know Howard, you know he didn't think so. But he ain't here. I would kid Howard and I say, in my story, Howard, there are two guys walking across the lake. One guy absolutely afraid with every step that the ice is going to crack and he's going to fall through and drown. And the other guy absolutely certain that the ice is going to hold him. And they embark on their walk together. And halfway across, sure enough, the ice breaks and they both drown. But the guy who thought the ice was going to hold him had a much nicer walk up until then. And I can decide how I'm going to walk, right? And sometimes maybe that's incorrect. I can't decide not to be afraid. I stack experiences, yours and mine, that tell me it's going to be okay. In fact, it already is okay. I'm 70 years old. I'm 34 years sober. There have been at least 15 or 20 times during that period that something might happen that I absolutely cannot handle if it does. Yet here I am. I credit Scott with the line, I'm living in the future I was afraid of. Staying in the day is critical. And that's not Pollyanna, you know. Look, when I pull out on I-40 Sunday to go home, I'm gonna look. I'm gonna look for the oncoming traffic, right? I'm not gonna go, well, let go and let God. We'll see if it's my time or not. But if I can't get out on that interstate, that's an unnatural, unreasonable fear that is imprisoning my life. And you guys you have modeled for me, you have shared with me, and me back with you, that's going to be okay. At 10 years sober, I went bankrupt. You know, the day that I went to jail for that DUI, there was nothing in the world I was more afraid of that day than going to jail. I don't have the skill sets for jail. I'm not a tough guy. Flash forward 10 years, well, at about 8 years, the thing I was most afraid of was being broke, losing our money, or outspending my earnings might be a more accurate appraisal. Being irresponsible, and it was happening. So Connie and I, we're rocketing toward bankruptcy. For 2 years, you don't go bankrupt overnight. It takes a little while. For 2 years, I'm taking calls. I'm talking to creditors who were pretty aggressive, right? They'd handed them over to collections, pretty aggressive. I had a knot in my stomach. I'm waking up again at 3 and 4 in the morning, which I hadn't done when I was sober. My head spinning, afraid to go out into the day, afraid of what it was going to be to go broke. And I wasn't afraid of living on the street. I was afraid of having to move from this house to this house, from this car to this car, from these clothes to those clothes. I thought we might actually have to move into an apartment, and we're cul-de-sac people. Now, laugh at me if you want. What I'm telling you is the way it felt in here, right? They went and got our cars. You know, we in a bankruptcy, they have a term, you surrender things, right? But it felt like they had kidnapped our cars, frankly. They came by in a flatbed truck and took these 2 cars, and I called my sponsor, Frank. I said, Frank, man, they took our cars. He said, Steve, They took their cars. He said, to be fair, they took the cars you quit paying for. Well, if you want to put a fine line on it. We lost our home. Now, we weren't living, it didn't look as bad because we weren't living in that home. That home we lost was in Richmond, Virginia, had 3 mortgages on it. You got to know somebody to get that 3rd mortgage, buddy. And I knew somebody. And we lost that home, foreclosure. My sponsor, Joe Sullivan, when I lived in Richmond, Virginia, Joe, I'm telling stories now again that are out of sequence, and I sometimes say my story's like a Quentin Tarantino movie. There's just no time and space continuum, you know, because I'm going to stop at 7:45 whether I'm done or not, and I'll pick back up in the morning or say something. But one of the things Joe said to me, I was sober just long enough to now, about 3 years sober at this point, living in Richmond, Virginia, to debate a little bit about the book, right? And I'm seeing where it says some of us tried to hold on to our old ideas and the result was nil till we let go absolutely. And I said, Joe, that implies I never had a good idea before I got to AA. It implies everything I did before getting to AA was somehow wrong. And I said, I showed up here, with some good ideas. And he said, Steve, that's not what it means, at least to him. And he said, and I'm sure you've got some good ideas. He said, none of us have heard one yet, but we're certain you've got one. He said, but what that means is that are you willing to set your ideas down? It doesn't mean that your ideas are all bad. It doesn't mean they're without merit. It doesn't mean they're without worth. He said, the problem is you don't have the discernment to tell the good ideas from the bad ideas. They are commingling. He said, you don't have the spiritual discernment. He said, so what we're asking you to do is as you go through these steps to just put them all down. The good ones will find their way back. The truth will find its way back. You don't have to throw them away. Let them go. And he said, the first old idea you need to let go of is the idea that you think you know what just happened. And I bring that up around this bankruptcy. During that couple of years, when money's tight, pressure ratchets up in a home. Certainly did in ours. Connie was afraid and mad. I was mad that she was mad. I was afraid. We argued. We finally had that argument you can't pretend you didn't have. We said things you can't pretend you didn't say. And I said, this is too hard, that either we're going to find a way to do this together or we need to do it separately. And she tells it a little different. I'm telling you my experience. The facts might be questionable. And I got in that marriage in a way that I didn't know I wasn't in it. I got all in that partnership in a way that I hadn't been. And it totally changed our relationship and certainly my relationship with her. So the point I would make, because Joe said you got to give up the idea you think you know what just happened. You're going to want to call it good or bad, right or wrong, should or shouldn't, fair or unfair. He said, but really, you might later look back and see where it tilted your life in a direction that you didn't have the courage and wisdom to choose for yourself. I will tell you that bankruptcy changed my marriage. So were we undergoing bankruptcy or are we doing relationship counseling? Now, if you came to me today and said, Steve, got an idea. You and Connie, it's going to be tough for a couple of years. You're going to fight a lot. You're going to lose your home. You're going to lose your car. You're going to lose a lot of your stuff. But man, when it's done, y'all are going to be tight. I go, look, I think we'll get some counseling, No, dude, I'm not signing on. I couldn't sign on for that today. But what's happened today is I have come to understand that whatever I am going through, I'm not a guy, this is just me, that back in where Dr. Paul wrote that absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. I don't know. That's too big for me, so I don't argue either side of that. What my experience tells me is there's nothing that happens in God's world that I can't use to good purpose. And ultimately, that's what you're asking me to do. Take what I've got, and how can we take our experience to be useful to somebody else, which gives value to the experience that I couldn't see when I was going through it. For the last few minutes here, when I got excited about being in AA, when I pled guilty finally to being an alcoholic, I got it. When the book said that second line under that description says, if so, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. I thought, oh man, that's bad news. Our book calls it a dilemma. I got a problem I can't solve. You got a solution I don't believe in or don't feel I have access to. Man, that's a tough spot. I'd gone through my big book, my first year sober. I wouldn't get in the circle and say the Lord's Prayer. I'd back away, and I don't know what that was. A lot of that was a look at me moment, I'm sure, looking back. But in the moment, it felt being true to me. I didn't know what I believed, and I said, I'm not just going to do this, right? And I'd step away from the circle, put my hands behind my back, and you guys said that's perfectly okay. And a guy came and asked, and in my big book, I'd blacked out everywhere it said spiritual awakening or spiritual experience. The language made me so uncomfortable. And the guy came over one night, he asked, he said, Steve, why are you stepping away from the circle? I mean, he wasn't chastising me, he at least was feigning genuine interest, and then going to probably come with an answer, right? But it was thought, he was doing it in a thoughtful way that didn't feel threatening to me. And he says, what's going on there? And I said, well, I don't want to be a hypocrite, I don't know what I believe, and I'm not just going to hold hands and sing Kumbaya with the rest of the campers, And he said, I got good news for you and bad news for you, man. And I felt a little condescended to by then. And if you've ever felt condescended to in AA, it's because someone was just being condescending. But he said, I got good news for you and bad news for you, man. And I said, okay, I'll play. What's the bad news? He said, the bad news is hypocrisy is way down your list of problems. And you might ought to address them in the order in which they will kill your ass. And I said, what's the good news? He said, the good news is there's room for another hypocrite in Alcoholics Anonymous. And man, I'm happier about that tonight than I was then. Trust me. We could have a HAA meeting in here if we needed to. That allowed me to step into the circle a little bit. I wasn't biting off everything, but I got to step in a little. My sponsor, Frank, took me back to Appendix 2 in the big book. And there was another thing kind of like Scott and I maybe have in common. And I want to say this too, I'm about to forget. When I was in that treatment center, Scott came in and had a conversation with me while I was there. He was my brother's next door neighbor. I don't know if we had met before then. Scott, I'm sure, was over there doing something from a 12-step perspective, but we ended up sitting in that little dining hall having a conversation. And from then till today, Scott has encouraged and championed me in a lot of ways in AA, and I'm grateful for that, and I'm grateful to get a chance to say it from here. I must add, I have video of Scott drinking. So I'll show that to you later, too. He was my brother's next door neighbor. They famously had a Halloween party. And my daughter was born on December the 17th of 1982. So before Scott got sober in 1981, that fall, they had the Halloween party on the 31st, and they had a bridal shower, a baby shower for my wife at my brother's house the next day. My brother recorded it on one of those cameras you're still carrying around like this, right? Several years later, a buddy came over and wanted to see the video we took of the baby shower. We put it in, rewound it to the front. Swear to God, Scott has got a clown uniform on, wearing the nose that you still wear today, holding a beer can and interviewing the kids as with the beer can as a fall microphone. So things can change. And I mean, all of that, those memories flood us when we're at events like this and with people that we're with and that we got history with. That's important. That's a big deal. Anyway, I'm struggling with that higher power thing. Frank took me back to the back of the book, and there was language that I found more comfortable. He talked about a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery. He talked about a profound alteration in my reaction to life, that I could substitute those for spiritual experience and spiritual awakening, because Frank said, Steve, I don't care what you call it. I want you to have it. You're hung up on language, and I want you to have an experience. And the beauty of Alcoholics Anonymous is once you have the experience, it's your experience. Then you get to talk about it and share that news using whatever language you want. There was a guy named Mo Holleran that was a part of that group that welcomed me in when I came back to Nashville in the late 90s. A few men here still remember Mo. He passed away in 2003. Mo he's the guy that, when you were new and you go to your meeting, and I know you guys all had one and probably still have one. When you're sitting in that meeting and that guy walks in and you go, man, I'm glad he's here. Man, I'm glad. That just makes me, I didn't even know Mo at first, but I hoped he would be at that meeting, right? Because it just felt like everything was going to be okay. And Mo always used a verse to a poem when he gave talks. And I didn't realize until years later that Mo did do a lot of talking from behind the podium around the Southeast during his years. He had quit by the time I met him. He was caretaking for his wife a lot of those last years who had Alzheimer's. But he would end with the verse to this poem. And he came down with cancer in 2003, and he was moving, deteriorating pretty quickly. And my buddy Jerry and I, who again's up in that picture, we took him to breakfast in October, and we knew it was going to be the last time probably we'd be together. And I said, Mo, would you mind if when I get a chance to share my story, I end with the verse to that poem, because it's been so helpful to me. And in the truest sense of Alcoholics Anonymous, it will help me pass on what you passed on to me. And Mo said he was a little embarrassed. And he said, oh, Steve, he said, if you think it'll help another drunk. Because, see, that's what Mo was about. He was as good AA member as I ever met. In fact, he loved alcoholics more than anybody I've ever met, drunk or sober. And I've been that guy, and maybe you have, but I sure have, at the meeting when the perennial slipper comes back in and I look away not to make eye contact, or I act busy on this night hoping he doesn't come back over to me. And look up, and Mo is already over there giving him a hug, giving him a kiss, because Mo was a kisser, and saying, we love you, man, we're glad you're back. Come over here and sit next to me. And that's the kind of AA member I'd like to be. But from that day till this, I've never told a version of this story that I didn't end with that poem. And it's always helped another alcoholic, because I'm the alcoholic, it always helps. It said, I sought my God I could not see. I sought my soul eluded me. But I sought my fellow man and found all three. And when you strip everything else away, for me, that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has been. That's what this relationship with a higher power has been. When after years of coming here, I finally am standing up here and you guys give me the privilege and the honor of sharing myself with you. When you sit there and pour back into me by listening and caring, this power shows up in a way that I can't define or comprehend. It's made it unnecessary for me to take a drink since June the 29th of 1989. But just as importantly for me, when I'm willing to accept it, it's given me a life that is happily and usefully whole. And that word whole is critical to me. It means nothing's missing. And if nothing's missing, then nothing's missing. I can't wait to spend the rest of the weekend with you guys. Thank you.